Welcome aboard EMIT Talks. On this episode, we dive deep into the essence of success. A quarterly summary of all the gems of insight and wisdom as delivered by our previous three guests. From Mo Il-Semen's brand strategy brilliance, to Omar Samra's epic adventures and near-death experiences, to Nadia Wasif's inspirational tale of revolutionizing the Egyptian book-selling business and more. They've poured their hearts out to us, and we're streamlining the essence of it all to you. Join us as we take an even deeper dive into the minds of these success icons and learn invaluable lessons that only titans of their fields can offer. The Essence, only on EMIT Talks. Challenge is usually our greatest teacher. For without testing ourselves and our limits, we can never truly know who we are. Let's dig deep and find out some of our success icons' tried and tested methods of dealing with adversity.
Somehow I had this idea that it was a good idea to to take a rowing boat and try and row across the Atlantic with my buddy Omar Noor,
who also has no rowing experience,
which also had no rowing experience. But contrary to popular belief, we did spend about 2 years learning the ropes and training our ass off. Basically nothing went to plan. On that day, it was the boat capsized in 45 knot wind, sort of Atlantic storm. We spent 13 hours fighting for our lives, and eventually we got rescued. But it was a failure of epic proportions because the goal was to get from the Canary Islands to Antigua. We didn't succeed in that. But there was another goal of this expedition, which was that we wanted to use this very extraordinary adventure where we're going to be at sea in a very fragile boat to shed light on the plight of refugees. It was supposed to capsize, but it was supposed to self-right. It was never supposed to not self-right, and it had been tested. So Omar and I had very different experiences, debriefing, and now obviously that many years have passed and so on. Omar's first thought was not like this, because he legit thought this was it, we were going to die. For me, I got into this, immediately I cared very little in the moment of the journey itself, even though there was a huge build-up. The fact that it looked very clearly that we weren't going to get to the other side. And I started to get very laser focused onto our own survival. And it was only 13 hours later, at the very sort of climax of this story, at the very kind of defining moment, that I started to think deeply about my family and specifically my daughter. And I remember having a flash, seeing my daughter. She was I think she was 6. She would have been 4 years old at the time. And I think that gave me the extra strength, the last bit that I needed in order to actually fight for surviving. There's a moment when I was hanging on this rope ladder, fighting for dear life, that it crosses your mind. It's like a split second, and you're like, you know what? It almost seems easier just to let go and just to usher in the end.
Usually the new brands are challenging even more than the old ones, because the old businesses, they come to you when they already know that they have a problem, because you have to think of yourself as an emergency doctor. So in my business, usually specifically the big ones, the big family businesses, they come to you when you have first generation against second generation partners, cousins. You have an entire empire of local, specifically even if family run business empires. Usually go to the doctor when you're in pain. So usually they come to us knowing they have a problem. And how does it usually work? You have a guy that owns, for example, a project in Guna, and he sees his competitor doing another project. But his cousin was working with us, and he sees his cousin doing much bigger brand with a much bigger impact, much bigger sales, and now they're signing, for example, their second project in Saudi Arabia. And the guy thinks he's using the same resources, but the guy that's working with Lunch Black my cousin, he's going places. So they call us and they tell us we need to sit and talk. So specifically when it comes to specifically the local established businesses, usually they call us with their own pain. They know exactly what they need.
I remember when the internet was born and we were told that this was going to be the most democratizing force in our lives, that all knowledge was now going to be equalized through accessibility. 20 or 30 years on, each of us lives in their own echo chamber.
Yep.
So this dream of democracy and accessibility has become a kind of, we live in a very autistic universe. And I'm not sure I'm happy with what the algorithm does to my life. Because in many ways, and today, my primary source of news is through my phone. Again, that is curated in a very slanted way. And these are all things that I think when you maintain a kind of community, Mahu, it offers you alternatives. It's again this idea of possibility. When I just exist in my own echo chamber and I'm only exposed to what the algorithm gives me, I'm cut off from all possibility. I'm actually completely disempowered. When you're writing, you're involved in the nitty-gritty and you're in the trenches, and you lose sight. You sit and agonize over a paragraph for 7 hours. You've lost sight of the 300 pages.
The bigger picture, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas this editor hasn't. And this is the relationship in many ways. Now, here an editor doesn't do the same thing. In Tahina, by the time you've gotten to the editor, you're basically editing language, style, syntax, format. You don't have the role of the editor, which is the person who sort of has the bird's eye view, who's looking at the whole thing, and who is challenging you on what you've written, the direction that this is going on, the order of the chapters. Why does it end here? What is your bigger picture? Where would you start?
Just like a calm sea never made a great sailor, great success can never come without the balance of great failures somewhere along the way. Let's find out where and how our success icons look back at their fantastic failures.
The hero story is to fail and then come back and triumph. So we decided that we weren't going to do that. We gave ourselves a year, so we really settled down and we were like, you know what? The pull to try and do it was no longer there. But what it did was it gave us a platform, a story that we then sort of started, speaking out loud and traveling the world and raising awareness about this issue. So in some sense, you can say it was its own kind of success. And I think it applies to any story. When you encounter failure of some kinds, immediately in the short term, it feels like it's the worst thing in the world. But eventually, give it enough time, and you will credit this failure for something else positive that will happen later on.
The idea of Launch Black started with us trying to present ourselves as the brand consultants until we were slapped in the face by the real brands globally. And we were told a couple of years ago, maybe 9 years ago, do you think this is a proper brand? Do you think this is how the world works? You guys are completely off. You still are trying to impress the local market. You're way off track, and you actually have to be much more invested to understand how do global brands work. So our biggest failure was our biggest success today, realizing that most of the local brands in Egypt are not so invested into positioning themselves globally.
I think my favorite failure continues to be my relationship with Diwan. Not Diwan, just my relationship with it. I think till today, I've stopped looking back, but I keep wondering, had I done this differently, what would today have been the outcome? I mean, it gets me nowhere, but it's an exercise in possibility. And I think that when you keep opening up possibilities, it just helps. You're able to see the world differently. And I think one of my biggest failures was that while, Hind, my sister, Nihal, our partner, and I started it together, we were the three active partners. We had two silent partners. I think at some point I should have walked away and I should have let the professionals, run it. And I didn't because I was too emotionally involved in it. But, it is what it is.
There are so many criteria and measurements to the concept of success, usually placed upon us by our peers. The true greats, though, define and redefine these criteria for themselves. Let's find out how.
Success to me equals authenticity. The more authentic you are with yourself, and it's also a beautiful thing is that it's a measure that only you can answer for yourself, because you can put whatever facade out into the world. People can think you're successful. That's easy. Comes easier to people than others. But the true measure of success is like how closely does your what you say and your actions and belief how closely does your actions and what you say track your beliefs. And the closer these things are aligned, the more truly successful you are. That might translate into financial success, might translate into fame, might translate into whatever, and it might not. But that basically will be the cards that you were dealt in this life. You could be somebody who becomes very rich, and so in the view of everyone, you are successful. But ultimately, deep down within yourself, you will know that you haven't been successful because you have abandoned yourself along the way. And perversely, you could be, you could have like not be blessed with the material gains or those types of things that people believe they're successful. But you deep down know that you are. But then your journey, you have to come to terms with the fact that like, I don't need to be successful in your eyes and your eyes and your eyes for me to feel validated. And I just have to be myself, my unique self, which is again goes back to just being authentic. So it's the simplest thing you can do, because all you have to do is just be you. But it's also the hardest thing as well, in especially like in this world that we live in, that is consistently asking more of you, that is asking you to do things more, to do it faster, and of course it's getting harder with with social media and the advent of AI and everything else.
The design, the service, all the intangible items they don't appreciate, but we have a very interesting way to measure the success. So in any industry, you go tell them, okay, so tell me what's a local brand that now has been well positioned, for example, in luxury experiences in Egypt. So Bayrak, it's Zizou's, Mohammed Zidane's, the football player's brand. When we did the brand and we sat with Al-Futim, the second day what happened was we took a store between La Martina, in front of our neighbor's Apple, in front of Armani Cafe, Philip Plain, D Squared. So this is a local brand with no history. It's a from scratch brand. The second we were able to create it, we were positioned between the biggest international brands. So this is very easy to...
So positioning is not just ethereal, but it can also be physical.
Yeah, it is, definitely. And this is why we always say, because again, I'm telling you, I have a very young soul about it. So when we're challenged about this, we say, for example, in real estate, for example, they say, so, yeah, but how would it be different? Look at the sales, look at the people, look at the community, look at the projects. In fact, look at this specific real estate developer. Look at his 12 years before us and look at his 1 year with us. It's very easy. And you want to compare? Let's compare. So here's 12 years before the positioning strategy, and here's 1 year, not 10, 1 year after it.
I'm constantly unsure of what success actually is. I think this definition changes regularly, and where I'm at with it at the moment is that success is the thing that nobody ever sees. That's true success. So outward success could be measured fiscally, could be measured in any number of ways. We like to always quantify everything. But I think true successes are the things that you master or gain control over that nobody actually ever sees and that you probably can't quantify. With AI, we are faced with our own expendability. With papyrus, it changed the way things were done. Papyrus is technology. AI is a different kind of technology, but I choose to look at it for now as a new way of collaborating. Because, who would turn down the chance to have a conversation, not with the smartest person in the room, but with the most well-informed person in the room? You'd be really daft to turn it down. But having said that, writing, creativity, all of these things, they're a muscle. You have to keep exercising that muscle. You don't give it up. So, مثلا, when you are working with AI, there is a science to engineering the prompt.
Absolutely.
And I believe this is something that is being taught now. And I think that, you know what? If you can become expendable as someone who... If the job that you're doing can be farmed out and done more efficiently, that doesn't rule you out. But you have to refocus your skills, your skill set into something else. But I think if this is something that can unleash creativity, I'm all for it.
It takes a long-term vision and insight to create a sustainable model of success in life, work, and beyond. Let's listen in to how our icons of success weighed and adapted their measures along the paths of their careers.
The Everest decision came, so the decision to do Everest, that it was planted, the seed was planted when I was 15 on that trip to Switzerland. However, it was kind of in the back of my mind, and then life would basically, teach me, sometimes would say, this is too far fetched, you're never going to do this, whatever, just focus on the real stuff and all of that. So I would get sidetracked.
We were in a crisis meeting trying to pick the mosaic tiles of a pool to have a design for the rooms to look for the people in the rooms in the hotel in Sahel to have an Instagrammable experience to the umbrellas and the pool area. Such details is going to cost you probably double the actual budget of the pool area, the swimming pool area. 3 years ago, people would call us insane, but today there's an entire board meeting to design such experience, to have a branded experience in the hotel. It's an Egyptian hotel, by the way. So we have this. I'm humbled by being recognized and seen by such Egyptian and local brands, and actually being let or allowed to create such experiences. So imagine right now being the most trending hotel, an Egyptian local hotel, that is now the most trending in Africa because it has the experiences that everyone are trying to
emulate.
Yeah, of course. And for that, this is exactly why I believe this is the golden time for people to be invested.
The future of Diwan, I think, is in its ability to become a cultural hub. I think with everything that's going on in the world, people crave community. They will continue to crave community because community is just an extension of our basic humanity. And what I think Diwan does beautifully, and what I would like to see more of, is that it brings people together. Anna, I'm just going to say that there have been some really rewarding moments in setting up Diwan. But the thing that never gets old, and that every time someone says it to me, it brings me a tremendous amount of joy, and it's like the first time I've heard it, is when someone tells me, I grew up in Diwan. I remember buying books from you. I remember the first time I heard of so-and-so, or read this, or was introduced to this idea, or this thought was through Diwan. And to me, this is incredibly gratifying. The future of Diwan is in community building, in bringing people together, in bringing ideas to people, in continuing that mix. Because, you can sit and doom scroll, and you can do a ton of different things online, but you can't do that. So, and it takes a special sense and a special kind of ability to do it. And I think Diwan does that really, really beautifully.
In this modern world, where maintaining our focus and attention spans is becoming increasingly difficult, it really boils down to those willing to do all the hard work, and maintain incredible levels of discipline in business, life, and play.
I think you have to split it between like what was the most physically demanding and what's like was most technically demanding.
And mentally.
Yeah. The mentally, I would say, so when it comes to the technicality, there's a lot of fear because there's these very steep mountains, very technical mountains. You're using 2 ice axes and you're standing on the tips of your, like on crampons, on the tips of your fingers. And so there's always the feeling of like, if I make a mistake, I slip, I fall. So there's that fear. And that's obviously very mentally taxing. When you do these big endurance climbs, not to say that Everest also doesn't have a lot of fear element, but the fear is sometimes can be very existential because you know an avalanche can happen at any moment and could wipe out this entire camp, but you don't know when it could happen or what moment. But the mental part becomes like from just the sheer exhaustion and discomfort that you're enduring on a daily basis for weeks at a time. Just to break it down, obviously it's to get to the top of Everest, it's like 4 camps. So the last day, I'm 12 kilos like under what I you're physically, mentally exhausted. But surprisingly, and maybe it was because I built it up so much in my head, the summit day was much easier than I thought. The day before was brutal, but the summit day was, maybe I expected it to be way harder than it actually was, and maybe I was just in a good space. But there was still a huge uncertainty.
Our data or our metrics or methodology is usually by your behavior. Because if I do the biggest brand ever and it's not selling, it's a failure. In fact, people usually mix us with marketing and we're brand management. And even in marketing, because we understand it, it's not our expertise, but even in marketing, we always say, listen, have you seen this campaign? It looks so nice. It's very creative. I will always say, does it sell? If it doesn't sell, to me, it's not creative. Thank you for it being so creative. Did it sell? No.
It won a Cannes award for the advertising, but the company didn't actually sell anything.
So this is our metrics. So our data is generally always business focused and always metrics focused. And by the way, its selling isn't always just monetary selling. So, for example, you have a company in stock, and you wanna in stocks, and you wanna raise the equity. You wanna be able to revive a dying company. So if its stocks are up, you're going right. If it's well positioned, you're going right. If the project announced made its stocks go even higher, you're doing right. So the metrics are clear. The data and metrics we use are very clear. The idea of you technically understanding if the metrics are done right or not, we educate the client.
I started writing about Diwan, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And in the beginning, it was like a data dump. So I sat down, I wrote it all down, and then I threw it out. And then I went back again, and I said, I need an organizing principle. So my organizing principle was, well, if I was in a shop, what would I do? I'd walk through the bookshop. So I divided every chapter into a section of the bookstore so that I could methodologically organize. I need structure. So I found the structure in mirroring an actual structure that exists. I think for me, my process, and it's a little bit rough. I start at 4 a.m.
Wow.
When the world is quiet, when I can trust that my phone won't beep, when I won't get any emails, I won't, I'm okay.
Minimal external stimulus.
Yeah. And so from 4 a.m. until 11 a.m. approximately, I would have 2 very big pots of coffee, and I would write new things. I wouldn't edit, I wouldn't, it was just like 7 hours of that from 4 to 11. And I would leave myself hooks. So in case I was stuck on something, I would be able to move to something else. From 11 to 2, I would edit the work of the previous days. Because by that time I'm sort of deflated and out of steam. so I can just edit. And a lot of the times I would print out what I'm editing, and I would do it by hand, because again, the more digitized something is, the easier it is to, control
Just
X,
go through
control
it, yeah.
C, control V, control. When you have to write it yourself, there becomes a question. Is this worth the effort of writing?
Ooh, it's a question.
It's a
It's a
question.
question.
So I would sort of sit and write and rewrite and be like, actually, and when your hand hurts and because you've been doing this for a few hours, and then you actually choose to keep this or delete this, or but that you're actually doing it because you really care.
Legacy is a big word, with many definitions and points of views according to the protagonist of every tale. Let's find out what our EMIT Talk protagonists would love to leave behind as their own legacy.
What have the mountains taught you?
I think it's taught me a lot about humility. It's taught me a lot about appreciating the simple things in life, just because your existence up there can be very rugged and difficult. I think it's triggered some spiritual kind of insights around like how small we are, like in this vast kind of world, and it's about how we can live and enact greatness in our own life, but at the same time realizing how insignificant we are. So it's this duality of, it's like you can be somebody who has like deep humility, but don't love yourself enough, or you don't give yourself enough space and regard, and so that could be a crutch. You could also be somebody who thinks so highly on themselves, has no humility, and that's a double crutch. But it's about balancing this thing, realizing on one hand that you are so fragile, that you're so insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but also at the same time recognizing your own greatness, your own brilliance within your own life, and not like towards other people or something, but just if you can balance those two things together, I think it's a very beautiful combination. Of course, I will still experience things in life, but I'm actually content with the amount of experiences and journeys and tribulations and trials that I've went through. And now it's the giving back time. Now it's about like really coming to terms with what is it that I've learned, like integrating these things, and how can I communicate these things? How can I, how can it
Reach out to more people,
yeah,
to affect more.
and it starts with Tila. And in order for me to impart some of that, like, let's say, like
Learned lessons.
learned lesson or different life that I've led, you need to be like present. Right? So it's not so much about her seeing me like out there gallivanting, doing all of these things. Maybe she'll see a bit of that, but it's about, this is somebody who did all of these things evidently throughout his life, but he presents himself now as this very present, grounded kind of person who feels at ease with this phase of his life that he's in, where he doesn't need to prove necessarily something. And it just becomes more about whatever you're doing, just do it with presence, just do it with like value in mind. And that's it, and I think it's something that we, to an extent, we all start to feel when we're in this phase, but it's about our resistance to it, and the more we surrender to it, then the more like we can faster usher this phase of life into existence.
We prefer, as problem solvers, the problem. So we prefer a problem to happen, because if I fix your problem, then I'm the savior. I change everything. But if you come to me and you have nothing, in fact, if I fix the problem, I'm much more expensive as a consultancy. If you come, so we prefer that because it's challenging. But if we advise for something, definitely, please, if you have a piece of land, just come to us with an empty land. Let us design the land, do the finance, do everything, the engineering, the architect, everything, and let us deliver a project that's well executed. So we definitely always promote, as a doctor, I always promote for you to have to take care of your health. But if I'm a doctor that is of challenge, as an emergency doctor, we feed over fixing problems. So there's
Bring them back to life.
yeah. So we prefer that. So our competitive soul likes fixing the problem, and this is our biggest expertise: how people react to brands. Because the biggest problem in brands, in our opinion, specifically in Egypt, it's they create brands according to the feeling of the owner, not the feeling of the audience. The owner can love the brand or hate the brand. We couldn't care. So in fact, we always say, specific in Arabic, أنا مش جاي أبهرك, أنا جاي أنجحك. So I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to make sure that you're actually well positioned. We take pride in that most, if not all, our luxury brands globally till today, ever since we signed together, till the second we're current consultants for them. So we haven't, alhamdulillah, lost any of our clients. No matter the brand, agents of, for example, Philippe Palace, they have Rolex and they have Hublot and Chopard. Ever since we've worked together since 2020 till today, so now we have 6 years in the pipeline consulting with them, and we take pride with them because now it's not just a client, we're growing into family and actually
partners and then family, like you said.
Yeah, and now, and we're not even empowered. Or not even empowered by them. We're honored to be their recommended consultancy.
Wow.
In the case of books, yes, audiobooks, ebooks, Kindles, you name it, it's all happening. But book selling is still very strong and people still go to brick and mortar shops. Why? It's because of the bookseller and the community around that. It is because of the fact that we curate and we choose and we enter into a dialogue. Bookselling has never been anything other than a dialogue. And that's why I think it's still alive. Because people crave that. COVID taught the whole world that in 2022, globally, more independent bookshops opened than in the 10 years before. And that comes from the fact that people realized we need community. We cannot exist alone. And bookshops are exactly that. They are at the vanguard of community building. So let me just put a pin in this and go back to, so what happened with book selling and publishing? So when the rest of our partners decided to open a publishing house, Hind and I were against it because we believe that we are bona fide booksellers and we want to stay that way. And the minute you become a publisher, your allegiance shifts. Your number one person is no longer the reader.
It's the author, isn't it?
It's the author, it's your own books. Your loyalties become split. And unless you are able to maintain a complete Chinese wall between the two, it becomes very difficult.
It usually takes a lifetime to realize that most of the beauty life has to offer lies in the journey and not the destination. Let's find out how our icons of success evaluate their own paths to fulfillment, their own journey.
I was one of those kids that had no clue what they wanted to do for a living. Like it's people usually are surprised by that because it looks like, if you look at my path, it looks like, this guy was very single-minded like the whole time. I graduated from school not really knowing what I wanted to study in university. I ended up going into engineering, Cairo University for a while, and then I switched to AUC, and then I wasn't really sure what I wanted to study then. I stumbled into economics because it was the most practical thing. What I really actually wanted to study was anthropology, but everybody basically told me,
what is
can you name one job that you, and I couldn't. I didn't even know what an the subject matter really appealed to me, but looking at the universe in Egypt, I thought I don't know what an anthropologist would do. Of course, now I know, but and perversely, interestingly, actually, that everything that I've done since lends itself more to anthropology than it does to anything else. But I was very dissuaded from this, and then when I graduated from university, I didn't know what I wanted to do as a job, and so people were like, well, if you don't know what you want to do, there's this thing called investment banking that seems like everybody wants to try and get a job at. So I ended up falling into that, and so My first couple of years in my career were, well, there was a honeymoon period of the first 6 months when you're just excited about everything. You know, I'm living in London. I'm away from my parents. I'm earning my own keep. You were earning a reasonably good salary for someone your age, so you can travel, you can do things. I could actually start climbing because the first climb I ever did was when I was 15 in Switzerland, and I came back actually wanting to climb Everest. That was the inspiration. But my parents were like, "There's no way we're going to pay money to put you at risk." And so I was just hiking and dreaming about it. But it was the moment when I was starting to earn my own salary and I was no longer financially dependent on my family that I was like, now I can make my own decision. And so for me, especially in London, there was always also the sense of guilt. Like, you know, your parents have invested so much in you. You're fortunate enough by God to get this job that's paying you well. And now you want to leave it and throw it all away. So that was kind of weighing on me. And then I also didn't know what else am I good at. And I never had the chance to really explore like what I'm good at.
So we've been in market for nearly 10 years and we see the growth and interest in the market. So when we started the first 4 or 5 years, people thought we're wasting time. You're trying to create a luxury experience in Egypt, up until we consulted with some of the agents of plenty of international brands with like Rolex, Chopard, and now Four Seasons and Mansouri, Maybach actually icons as well. What's interesting to us is that we started by realizing that such brands are so invested into so many intricate details, and to us it makes sense today because now we see the locals doing the same. So now we're celebrating, for example, a new project in Sahel in North Coast, and what's very interesting is how now the local businessmen and women are actually investing in such details as the global brands. So now we're in our, actually I believe now we're in our comfort zone. This is exactly how we grew from a branding agency into a brand management firm, now to a full-fledged business consultancy. The more we were invested into details, the bigger the impact, and the more we demanded some authoritative roles. So it all started with us trying to create a nice brand, and then we asked ourselves, but they're missing the operations. We need to be invested in operations, so we need to hire someone technical in our team to be able to consult for our clients. So we grew from a consultancy into a fully fledged empire. From 9 years, you have 4 years where you're trying to prove yourself. You're trying to just be seen. And then you were seen. And we spent 5 years trying to commit, to fulfill. And you've delivered. So now it's the time you feel like, okay, now it's my time. I have to relax, play it strategic, and actually develop. On a personal level, I feel blessed that I find that after such marathon, so comforting to be able to teach and grow other people. Yani, it's something spiritual. You always feel like, I hope I don't grow greedy. I hope I don't grow too arrogant. You just hope you don't change. And when I found love into teaching, my heart
found peace.
Yeah, it felt humbling to be able to feel like إيه ده اللي أنا بعمله ده, whatever I'm doing is good. I'm willing to just teach this. If I was ever able to help the local economy, I'm okay. I feel like I've done my part and تمام.
What Diwan did at that time that was different was we basically built the space that we wanted to hang out in and that we couldn't find. So we walked around and, you know, we traveled, we went to bookshops in different parts of the world, and we found these really inviting spaces with the cafe, with all of the stuff. And we said, you know what, we want to do this in our hometown, but we want to do it in a different way. We want to also bring, and people will find this funny, but at the time when we opened, we had VHS tapes of all the old Arabic movies. Eventually we had DVDs, we had CDs, CD-ROMs. I mean, Taban, all of this has now completely disappeared. But we had a huge multimedia section. And the cafe and stationery, we emphasized the centrality of the customer. You matter. Yani, the oldest way that human beings have related to each other is through barter exchange. It's through trade. What is trade? Trade is the exchange of goods, commodities, services, people.
And ideas.
Ideas. So that was our starting point. And I have to say that as booksellers, what we also did that was interesting at the time was that we said, we are going to put our bestseller lists. Now, bestseller lists are important for authors and publishers because that's a success. But why are they important to readers? Because they're kind of a thermometer. First of all, they are introducing you to what other people are reading, which before Amazon and before collaborative filtering and before all of this, other people didn't know what other people
Before
read.
online rating culture and 4 out of 5 stars, etc., etc.
Diwan was born from a conversation amongst friends of, if you could do anything, what would you do? And we kind of all said, well, I'd open a bookstore. And that's how we started. You know, it was one of those, if you could. So this sort of like, let's look at the world of infinite possibility and dream. And a few nights ago, I was having dinner with my family, and the conversation was, what is the one job or what is the one thing that if you weren't doing, that if you're not doing right now, you would love to do? And I said, I would really like to go back to writing because it's the one thing that I find so incredibly painful. And so I avoid it. So I take on other things.
How and what you tell yourself can really be the difference between a life of fulfillment or living in constant cycles of disappointment. We dive deep into the minds of our success icons and how they conduct their own internal dialogue.
What's Omar Samra's inner dialogue like? What's your own pep talk like?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I think in my 20s, that's the Everest days. It was very much like, push through, overcome challenges, live completely out of your comfort zone. Like it's this kind of very alpha kind of mindset. And then, of course, at the time I was also trying to build my career as well. And then in the 30s, it became just like a kind of a continuation of that, trying to build like a legacy almost, like trying to almost like a stack, building a stack of achievements, adventures that I could be like, something that for me that was like, I could be proud that I did all of these things. And then obviously from a career perspective, also trying to get to a place where in my companies, I think there was a lot, especially in my early 30s, there was a mindset of like, trying to build a bigger company, to expand more geographically, to do this and that and the other. Like I remember like opening a bunch of different businesses. And now in my 40s, it's kind of switched quite a bit. And now I'm like, also in the mid to tail end of the 40s, it's, I'm actually spending more time thinking about decluttering, closing things off that don't necessarily sit right there square in what I want to do. So I'm starting to apply, I guess, a different filter.
I always try to hit a level of inner transparency that every single time I go to bed, every single night, I ask myself, have you done everything you can to help your clients, yes or no? In fact, my biggest boosts of life is random calls from random clients when they just realize what have been done in their businesses. So if you ask me what keeps you going, and personally, it's a random call from a client telling you, you know what, I'm so impressed that I didn't even ask you to do me this specific thing. Or actually 3 days ago, a client called me and told me, Saman, our contract was over last year. Why did you send me this specific project? And I told him, because you've not been focused in this industry for the past 11 months. He says to me, man, you guys are unbelievable. There's not a single reason for why you'd send me that. We're not an agency. We don't mark up on deals. So we're not a broker. We don't mark up on connections. And he tells me, and it's a factory and he's doing 2,500 furnished apartments. I don't have to, I'm not obliged to do it. And I was good. I connected them and I'm good. I was okay. But what was so interesting is when he called me, he was like, it isn't about you being a good consultant as Launch Black. It's just, you're not required to do this. It's not, I wouldn't say not in our contract. Our contract is over a year ago. So you guys doing this, it keeps you alive, and this
This is what builds brand equity. For Launch Black, this is what people will realize down the line.
I believe in process and I believe in experimentation. So I think everything in this world, and this is where I differ from, I think, the Gen Zers. Yani, Anna, for me, the number one ingredient of anything is ridiculous amounts of hard work. I think that's a generation thing. And I'm not judging people who disagree, because I get told things like, don't work hard, work smart. Fine, sure. That's not what I was brought up on. That's not the terrain that is familiar to me. And I think we all we veer towards familiarity. Although I've just spent time telling you how I like to challenge the familiar.